The dust of the trail clung to Ilara like a shroud, a gritty testament to miles traversed in silence and sorrow, each sunrise a fresh torment, each sunset a hollow reprieve. Redemption. The town's name, painted on a weathered plank swinging from a lone gallows-like post, was a cruel jest in the face of the unrelenting sun that beat down upon the parched earth, sucking the life from everything that dared to draw breath. Her worn boots, stitched and restitched by her own tired hands, carried her past the shuttered windows and grim, watchful faces, each one a study in suspicion, towards the raucous heart of the settlement, the Dust Devil's Saloon. Its name was an honest one, at least. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of stale beer, sweat, and desperation, a cacophony of rough laughter and the clatter of poker chips the only music. She stood by the door, a wraith in faded calico, her throat too tight for words, her dignity a fragile shield against the stares that stripped her bare. When she finally found her voice, it was a mere whisper, asking for work, any work, a plea swallowed by the din. A leering man, his face a roadmap of broken veins, was about to grab her arm when a shadow detached itself from the far corner. He was a man carved from the very granite of the mountains that loomed beyond the town, his face unreadable, his eyes the color of a winter sky. Silence fell, sudden and heavy, as he moved. He didn't speak to her, nor to the leering man, but to the stout, aproned figure behind the bar. "She works," he said, his voice low, raspy, like stones grinding together. Kitchen, the saloon keeper, a man whose authority moments before had seemed absolute, merely nodded, eyes darting nervously towards the silent figure. Ilara felt a tremor pass through her, not of fear, but of a strange, unnerving stillness. This man, a stranger, had intervened, his reasons as opaque as the grimy windows. She clutched the meager bundle of her belongings, her gaze fixed on the splintered floorboards, a silent acknowledgement passing between her and the unseen forces that had, for now, offered a fragile stay against the abyss. The kitchen was a cramped, sweltering space, but to Ilara, it was a sanctuary, a place where the ghosts of her past might, for a few hours, be kept at bay by the rhythm of work, the scent of simmering beans and baking bread a balm to her frayed spirit. Ilara's days in the Dust Devil's kitchen settled into a grueling, monotonous rhythm, marked by the rising sun and the last drunken shouts of departing patrons. She scrubbed, chopped, stirred, and baked, her movements economical, her face a mask of quiet endurance. The settlers, a motley collection of hard-bitten men and a few weary women, treated her with a mixture of indifference and coarse curiosity. She was the silent cook, the woman who appeared with platters of food and vanished back into the steam and shadows, her past a closed book they lacked the delicacy to try and open. He was always there, Silas. He would take his meals at a small table in the corner, away from the main flow of rough camaraderie, his presence a brooding fixture in the saloon's chaotic landscape. He ate her food slowly, methodically, his eyes often distant, fixed on some point beyond the grimy walls, or sometimes, unsettlingly, on her hands as she worked the dough or ladled stew. No word of praise ever crossed his lips, no gesture of acknowledgement beyond the clink of coins he left, always a fair sum, on the scarred wooden counter for the saloon keeper to collect for her wages. Yet, small things began to accumulate, like dust motes in a sunbeam, too insignificant to name but altering the atmosphere nonetheless. A sack of better quality flour than she was used to appeared one morning. The wood box beside the voracious stove, a constant drain on her energy to keep filled, seemed to replenish itself overnight. Once, when a drunken brawler stumbled towards the kitchen door, intent on some vague harassment, Silas had risen, not quickly, but with a deliberateness that froze the man mid-stride. A look, nothing more, had passed between them, and the brawler had retreated, muttering apologies into his beer. Ilara observed it all, her senses sharpened by years of navigating peril. She catalogued these instances, these quiet interventions, unsure of their meaning. His silence was a heavy cloak, and beneath it, she sensed a weight, a history as scarred as the landscape outside. Her initial mistrust, a reflexive shield forged in past betrayals, remained, but it was now threaded with a reluctant curiosity. Who was this man who spoke in actions rather than words, whose gaze held the weariness of ages yet missed nothing? She knew nothing of him, not even his full name, only that the saloon keeper treated him with a deference that bordered on fear, and that his quiet command had given her a precarious foothold in this harsh, unforgiving town. Her internal world was a landscape of remembered pain, of faces she tried to forget, but as she needed bread, the image of his still, watchful face would sometimes superimpose itself over the sorrow, a question mark in the bleak narrative of her existence. And Silas, watching her move with a grace that seemed out of place in the squalor of the kitchen, felt a stirring in the desolate chambers of his own heart, a protective instinct he hadn't known he still possessed, an echo of a duty he thought long dead. The fragile piece of redemption, always as brittle as sun-baked clay, began to crack. Rumors, like tumbleweeds, rolled through the town, whispers of a powerful cattle baron from the east, a man named Blackwood, who claimed ancestral rights to the very land upon which their meager homes and businesses stood. Anxiety, a cold serpent, coiled around the hearts of the settlers. Their dreams of a new beginning, already so tenuous, were threatened with obliteration. Ilara felt the tension in the way the men gulped their whiskey, their laughter harsher, their eyes darting more frequently to the saloon doors, as if expecting dispossession to walk in at any moment. One evening, a group of Blackwood's men, arrogant and swaggering, strode into the Dust Devil, their spurs ringing like funeral bells on the wooden floor. They demanded drink, then food, then began to openly mock the town and its inhabitants, their voices loud, their intentions clear, intimidation. One of them, emboldened by drink and the apparent lack of resistance, cornered Ilara as she delivered a tray of food, his hand snaking out to grab her wrist, his breath foul with cheap liquor. "Too pretty to be slaving in a kitchen, girl. Come with us, we'll show you a better time." Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through Ilara's composure. Before she could react, before anyone could, Silas was there. He hadn't moved quickly, but he simply materialized between her and her aggressor, a wall of silent, unyielding granite. "Leave her," he stated, his voice still low, but now carrying an edge that sliced through the saloon's noise, making the air crackle. The hired gun, momentarily surprised, sneered. "And who are you to tell me what to do, old man?" Silas didn't answer the question directly. Instead, his gaze swept over the intruders, then to the anxious faces of the settlers. He reached into his worn vest and produced a sheaf of papers, aged and creased. "This town," he announced, his voice resonating with an authority that stunned the room into absolute silence, "is redemption. And it is mine. Every building, every street, every speck of dust you stand on, belongs to me. These people," his gaze found Ilara, held it for a heart-stopping moment, "are under my protection." The hired guns, faced not with a nameless drifter but the proprietor of the entire damned town, looked uncertain. The saloon keeper, who had been cowering behind the bar, now straightened, a flicker of hope in his eyes. Ilara stared, the tray slipping from her numb fingers, its contents clattering unheeded to the floor. Silas, the quiet watcher, the man of few words, owned redemption. The implications washed over her in a dizzying wave. His past acts of subtle aid were cast in a new, confusing light. Was it kindness, or the careful management of an asset? Was he her protector, or merely her proprietor? The revelation was a chasm opening at her feet, and the fragile trust she had begun to nurture threatened to fall into its depths. This man, who had offered her a lifeline, was far more, and far less, than he had seemed. The mystery of Silas had deepened, becoming a stark, unavoidable presence in her life. The confrontation with Blackwood's men was merely the overture to a more brutal symphony of conflict. The cattle baron, incensed by the defiance of a town he considered already his, decided to escalate. He wouldn't just threaten, he would break redemption, make an example of it. His riders became a constant, menacing presence on the outskirts, their campfires like predatory eyes in the darkness. Supplies into town dwindled, choked off by Blackwood's blockade. Fear, once a serpent, now became a suffocating blanket. It was during a desperate, moonless night that Blackwood made his move. Gunfire erupted at the edge of town, the sharp cracks echoing the splintering of hope. The settlers, mostly farmers and small merchants, were no match for trained gunmen. Silas, however, was. He moved through the chaos with a deadly calm, his old Colt seeming an extension of his arm, each shot precise, each command to the terrified townsfolk clear and steady. Ilara, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, found herself not cowering in the kitchen, but drawn into the maelstrom. she saw Silas, silhouetted against a burning wagon, reloading, his face grim, etched with a pain that seemed older than the town itself. He was everywhere, shoring up a barricade, dragging a wounded man to cover, his quiet strength the only thing holding Redemption together. A stray bullet ricocheted, whining past Ilara's head, and she stumbled, dropping the bucket of water she'd been carrying to douse a spreading fire. In that moment of raw terror, with the smell of gunpowder and burning wood filling her lungs, she saw one of Blackwood's men take aim directly at Silas's exposed back. There was no time for thought, only instinct. "Silas!" Her scream, raw and desperate, cut through the din. He whirled, his gun barking once, twice, the attacker falling. But the momentary distraction had cost him. Another gunman, hidden in the shadows, fired. Ilara saw the puff of dust from Silas's shoulder, saw him stagger, a dark stain blossoming on his shirt. Without hesitation, she ran to him, heedless of the bullets still flying. She reached him as he leaned against a wall, his face pale but his eyes still fierce. Her hands, usually so steady with a knife or a ladle, trembled as she tore a strip from her apron, pressing it against the wound. "You need to get out of here," he rasped, trying to push her away. She shook her head, her gaze locking with his. "No," she said, her voice surprisingly firm. I stay in that moment, surrounded by chaos and death, something shifted between them, a barrier crumbling. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not just the quiet cook, but a woman of fierce, unexpected courage. And she, looking into his pain-filled eyes, saw not the enigmatic owner of a town, but a man fighting for something more than land, a man who had, in his own gruff way, offered her shelter when she had none. The trust, once a fragile seedling, had been forged in fire, a bond sealed by shared peril and a mutual, unspoken vow to protect. The dawn that broke over Redemption was bruised and silent, the air acrid with the lingering scent of smoke and defeat, Blackwood's defeat. His remaining men had scattered with the first light, leaving their dead behind, the will of the town, embodied by Silas and surprisingly, its people, proving stronger than their greed. Silas, his arm bandaged, his face etched with exhaustion, stood surveying the damage, but there was a new light in his eyes, a lessening of the shadows that had long dwelled there. Ilara, equally weary, brought him a cup of coffee, her movements no longer just those of an employee, but of a partner in survival. He took it, his fingers brushing hers, a small, fleeting contact that spoke volumes. The silence between them was no longer heavy with mistrust, but filled with a quiet understanding, the kind that needs no words. In the weeks that followed, Redemption began to heal. The settlers, united by the shared ordeal, worked together to rebuild, a new sense of community forged in the crucible of Blackwood's attack. And at the heart of this fragile resurgence were Silas and Ilara. The kitchen of the Dust Devil, once just Ilara's workplace, slowly transformed. It became warmer, more welcoming. Silas found himself spending less time in his shadowed corner and more time near the kitchen doorway, watching Ilara, sometimes even offering a rare, gruff suggestion for a dish, a suggestion she would consider with a small, almost imperceptible smile. He never formally asked her to stay, nor did she formally accept. It was an unspoken agreement, as solid and binding as any written contract. One evening, as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and soft rose, Silas led Ilara away from the saloon, towards a small, dilapidated cabin on the edge of town, one he had quietly begun repairing himself. He had cleared the weeds, mended the porch, and inside, a simple table and 2 chairs stood waiting. On the table was a single, wild desert bloom in a tin cup, a splash of tenacious beauty in the harsh landscape. He said nothing, merely held the door open for her. Ilara stepped inside, her heart swelling with an emotion she hadn't dared to feel for so long, hope. This wasn't just a cabin, it was a promise of peace, of a shared future built on the foundations of mutual respect and hard-won affection. Their pasts, with their attendant griefs and guilt, were not erased, but they no longer held the same power. They had found, in the desolate expanse of Redemption, a redemption of their own, a quiet haven where 2 lonely souls could finally begin to build a home, not of wood and stone, but of shared silences, quiet acts of kindness, and the enduring strength of a love that had blossomed against all odds. Their story, like the rugged landscape that cradled their town, speaks of resilience in the face of desolation, of the quiet power of unspoken understanding, and the profound truth that even in the harshest soil, trust and love can take root and flourish. It reminds us that redemption is not always a grand gesture, but often a series of small, courageous acts, the offering of shelter, the sharing of a burden, the choice to stand by another when all seems lost. Ilara and Silas, two souls scarred by the world, found in each other a strength they didn't know they possessed, transforming a place of hardship into a testament of hope. Their journey whispers that even the most guarded hearts can open, and that true connection is often forged not in grand pronouncements, but in the silent language of deeds, in the steadfast gaze that says, "I see you, and I will not let you fall." If their tale of courage, quiet devotion, and the slow blossoming of love in an unforgiving land has touched your heart, then we invite you to become a part of our community. Subscribe to our channel for more inspirational stories that explore the depths of the human spirit and the enduring power of connection. Let these narratives remind you that even in the quietest corners, the most profound stories unfold. Hit that subscribe button and join us as we continue to share tales that inspire, move, and offer a glimmer of light in the darkness.